The Empire was the most feared power in the galaxy. They had conquered 17 star systems, and they did it not with clever words or trade agreements. They did it with terror. Their warriors stood 9 feet tall, covered in black scales that could stop bullets. Their jaws could crush metal. Their claws could tear through starship walls like paper. When a fleet appeared in your sky, you had 2 choices: surrender or die. For 300 years, no species had chosen to fight back. When the United Terran Alliance made first contact with the everyone expected war, humans were new to the galactic stage. They were small, soft, and had no natural weapons. Their skin could be cut by a kitchen knife. Their bones could break from a simple fall. To the humans looked like prey animals that had somehow learned to build starships. But war did not come. Instead, there were negotiations. They were curious about these strange creatures who smiled when threatened and made jokes in the face of death. A treaty was signed. Peace for now. But the treaty had conditions. They demanded a human cultural ambassador. They wanted to study humanity up close, learn their weaknesses, understand why these fragile beings had spread across so many worlds without being conquered. The United Terran Alliance had no choice but to agree. Did not volunteer for this mission. She was not a soldier or a diplomat or a spy. She was a pediatric nurse from a city on Earth known for its beaches and seafood. She had spent 12 years taking care of sick children. She knew how to calm a screaming toddler at 3 in the morning. She knew how to give medicine to kids who hated medicine. She knew how to make a scared child laugh. None of these skills seemed useful for living among alien conquerors. But the Interstellar Cultural Exchange Program did not care about her opinions. Her file said she spoke 4 languages. Her psychological evaluation said she had excellent interpersonal skills and unusual stress tolerance. A computer somewhere decided she was perfect for the job. 2 weeks later, she stood in the docking bay of the flagship Dread Sovereign, holding a single duffel bag containing everything she owned. The ship was enormous, dark, and cold. The walls were made of some black metal that seemed to absorb light. The air smelled like iron and something else, something animal. Guards surrounded her. Each one was twice her height, their yellow eyes watching her every movement. Their scales rustled when they moved, making a sound like dry leaves. Was terrified, but she had learned long ago that showing fear only made things worse. So she kept her face calm and followed the guards deeper into the ship. The throne room was the largest space she had ever seen inside a spacecraft. It could have held a football stadium. At the far end, sitting on a chair made of bones and black metal, was Grand Warlord. He was massive, even for a. His scales were darker than the others, almost pure black and covered in old scars from battles won long ago. His eyes burned like dying stars, red and gold mixed together. When he spoke, his voice was so deep that felt it in her chest. "You are the human," he said. It was not a question. Bowed, she had practiced this. "Yes, Grand Warlord, I am honored to serve in your household." Made a sound that might have been laughter. "Honored, yes, that is what your leaders told you to say." He leaned forward and could see every tooth in his mouth. There were many teeth. "You will live among us. You will learn our ways, and you will teach my heir about humanity." For the first time, noticed the small figure standing beside the throne. Small was relative, of course. The child was already 3 feet tall, covered in scales that were lighter than her father's, almost gray. Her eyes were pure gold, and they stared at with open hostility. "This is," continued, "she is 4 years old by our counting. She will be Warlord after me. You will show her what humans are, their softness, their weakness." His mouth twisted into something like a smile. "So she may learn to exploit it when she conquers your worlds." Looked at the child. Looked back, her small claws flexing, her teeth bared in a silent challenge. "Understood," Grand Warlord said. She did not understand at all. Her quarters were small but functional. A bed that was too hard, a desk, a window showing the stars outside. No decorations, no warmth. She unpacked her few belongings, trying to make the space feel less like a prison cell. She was hanging up her spare clothes when the door hissed open. Stood in the doorway. The child's scales were bristled, standing up from her skin like the fur of an angry cat. Her claws were extended. Her teeth were showing. Had seen that look before. It was the look of a child who wanted attention and did not know how to ask for it nicely. "Hello," said, keeping her voice soft. "Do you need something?" Did not answer with words. Instead, she lunged. The attack was fast. Barely had time to register movement before the child's teeth sank into her forearm. Pain shot up her arm, sharp and immediate. But as the initial shock faded, realized something. The bite hurt, yes, but it was not serious. The teeth had barely broken the skin. They were baby teeth, small and not fully developed. The child had thrown her whole body into the attack, but she simply did not have the strength or the equipment to do real damage. In the corridor outside, could see guards watching. Their eyes were wide. They were waiting for something, waiting for her to scream, waiting for her to cry, waiting for her to confirm everything they believed about weak, pathetic humans. Instead, looked down at the small creature hanging from her arm. His golden eyes stared up at her, filled with fierce determination. She was trying so hard to be scary. She was trying so hard to prove herself. She was 4 years old and already carrying the weight of an empire on her small shoulders. Did the only thing that felt right. She laughed. She cooed, reaching down with her free hand to Pat's head, right between the two small horn nubs that would someday grow into the massive horns of an adult. "Look at those little teeth. Aren't you just the little apex predator?" The effect was immediate. Released her arm and stumbled backward, her scales going flat against her skin in confusion. Her mouth opened and closed several times, but no sound came out. No one had ever called her cute before. No one had ever laughed at her attacks. No one had ever patted her head like she was something soft and precious, instead of something dangerous. What is wrong with you?" finally managed to say. Smiled, looking at the small bite marks on her arm. They were already starting to swell a little. She would need to clean them properly. "Nothing is wrong with me," she said, "but I think we're going to be friends, little teeth." She used the nickname without thinking, and she saw flinch at it, not from fear, from something else, something the child had probably never felt before. Turned and ran. Watched her go, then looked at the guards still frozen in the corridor. They stared at her like she was the alien here, like she was the strange and terrifying creature they did not understand. Maybe she was. She closed her door, found the first aid kit she had brought from home, and began cleaning her wound. Tomorrow would be interesting. She could already tell. Outside her window, the stars drifted past, cold and uncaring. But for the first time since she had arrived on this ship of monsters, felt something like hope. Children were children, no matter how many teeth they had. She knew how to handle children. The medical bay of the dread sovereign was cold and bright, filled with tools that looked more like weapons than healing instruments. Sat on a metal table while a medic examined her arm. His name was, and his face was covered in scars that told stories of many battles survived. He applied a healing salve to her wound with surprising gentleness. His claws, which could have torn her apart without effort, moved with careful precision. "The air attacked you," he said. His voice was flat, stating a fact. "She bit me," agreed. "It's not a big deal." Stopped moving. He stared at her like she had said something insane. Not a big deal. The future warlord of the empire attacked a treaty guest. You have the right to demand retribution. It is written in the agreement between our peoples. Retribution, tilted her head. For what? She's a child. Children bite. My nephew Minu went through a biting phase when he was 3. Bit everyone. His mom, his dad, his teacher, the family dog. He grew out of it. The medic's claws trembled slightly. You compare our heir to a human infant. I compare her to a child, said simply, because that's what she is. A child who wanted to see what would happen if she bit me. Now she knows. I'm not scared and I think she's cute. That's probably not the answer she was expecting. Finished bandaging her arm in silence. When he spoke again, his voice was different, quieter. You are very strange human. I get that a lot. She left the medical bay and went to find the cafeteria. She was hungry, and she had learned long ago that most problems seemed smaller after a good meal. The cafeteria was a large room filled with warriors eating their morning meal. The food looked like raw meat, and it probably was. Were carnivores. They did not cook their food. When walked in, every conversation stopped. Hundreds of yellow eyes turned to look at her. She could feel their stares like physical weight on her skin. Word had spread. Everyone knew what had happened. The human had been bitten by the Heir, and she had laughed. She had called the future destroyer of worlds cute. She had compared children to human bobbies. It was unthinkable. It was insulting. It was fascinating. Got her food from a confused server who did not seem to know what humans ate. She ended up with something that looked like purple vegetables and something that was definitely raw meat. She took it to an empty table in the corner and began eating, ignoring the stares. The vegetables were actually pretty good. For the next several days, stalked through the ship like a small, scaly ghost. She would appear suddenly around corners, baring her teeth. She would growl during meals, watching from across the cafeteria. She left piles of shed scales outside's door, which apparently was a traditional threat. It meant something like, I am growing stronger, and one day I will destroy you. Collected the scales. They were actually quite beautiful, catching the light and showing colors hidden in what looked like plain gray. She strung them together with some thread from her sewing kit and hung them from her ceiling. When the artificial wind from the air system hit them, they made a soft tinkling sound. Came to investigate 3 days later, drawn by the strange noise coming from the human's quarters. She stood in the doorway, staring at her own scales hanging from the ceiling like decorations. "What is this?" she demanded. "A wind chime," said, looking up from her book. "They're pretty, right? Thank you for the gift." Gift's voice cracked with confusion. "That was a threat. It means I am going to defeat you." Oh, considered this. "Well, they still made a nice wind chime. Do you want to come in? I was just reading." Did not come in. She fled, her small feet pounding against the metal floor as she ran away. But she came back the next day, and the day after that. Each time she would stand in the doorway watching do ordinary human things, reading, writing in her journal, exercising, eating snacks she had brought from Earth. Each time would invite her in. Each time would run away. But she was running away slower, standing in the doorway longer. Her scales were bristling less. Grand Warlord noticed. He summoned to his chambers, a private room even larger than the throne room, with windows showing the conquered worlds of his empire spinning in the darkness of space. "Explain," he commanded. "Bode, explain what, Grand Warlord?" "My daughter," his voice was thunder. "She does not sleep well. She cannot focus on her combat training. She asks her tutors questions about humans, endless questions. Her fury was supposed to be satisfied by your fear. Instead, she grows more confused each day." "I'm sorry her training is suffering," said carefully. "I did not ask for apology. I asked for explanation." Leaned forward, his massive body blocking out the starlight. "Why do you not fear her?" Thought about this question seriously. It deserved a serious answer. "I have spent 12 years working with children," she finally said. "Sick children, scared children, angry children who did not understand why their bodies were hurting them. I have been hit, kicked, bitten, and had things thrown at my head. I once had a 7-year-old patient try to stab me with a fork because he was terrified of getting a shot." She paused, remembering that day. The boy's name was, he had cancer. He was so scared, and he did not know how to be scared except by being angry. "Your daughter is scary," continued. She has claws and teeth and scales, but she is also 4 years old and she has never met anyone who was not afraid of her. I think she does not know what to do with someone who treats her like a normal child instead of a monster. Was silent for a long moment. When he spoke again, his voice was quieter. We are monsters. That is what we are. That is what makes us strong. Maybe, said, but maybe she could be something else too, if she had the choice. Choice, spoke the word like it was foreign to him. Do not choose what we are. We are born warriors. We are raised warriors. We die warriors. Humans choose all the time, said. It is probably our greatest weakness, but sometimes it is our greatest strength too. She left the Grand Warlord sitting in his chambers, staring out at his empire with an expression she could not read. That night, for the first time, did not run away. She appeared in his doorway as usual, but when invited her in, she took one small step forward, then another. Then she was standing in the middle of the room, looking around at the small touches had added. The wind chime made of scales, a picture of her family back on Earth, a small plant she had brought from home, somehow still alive despite the ship's artificial environment. Why do you have a plant? Asked. It reminds me of home, said. Do you want to touch it? The leaves are soft. Reached out with one claw and touched the leaf with surprising gentleness. Her golden eyes went wide. It is soft, she whispered. Lots of things are soft, said, and that's okay. Soft things can be beautiful too. Looked at her, and for the first time there was no hostility in her eyes, just curiosity, just a child wondering about the strange world she had never been allowed to explore. Will you tell me about Earth? She asked. Of course, said, but first, do you want a snack? I have some dried fruit, it's sweet. I do not know what sweet means. Smiled, then let me show you. They sat together on the floor of small room, eating dried mangoes and talking about a planet covered in blue oceans and green forests. Outside the window, stars drifted past. Neither of them noticed that they were being watched. In the corridor, the medic stood frozen, staring at the impossible scene before him. The heir of the empire, sitting with a human, eating fruit and asking questions about flowers. He turned and walked away, unsure if what he had seen was the beginning of something wonderful or something dangerous. Perhaps it was both. Was the weapons master of the dread sovereign, a position he had held for 40 years. He had trained 3 generations of warriors. He had killed more enemies than he could count. His body was a map of scars, each one a story of survival. He had trained since she could walk, shaping her into the weapon she was meant to become. The heir was talented, perhaps the most naturally gifted student he had ever taught. Her reflexes were perfect. Her instincts were sharp. She attacked without hesitation and showed no mercy. But something was wrong. For the past week, had been distracted during training. Her attacks were still precise, but her mind was elsewhere. She kept glancing toward the observation deck, where the human often sat doing something strange with colored strings. Focus, barked, striking his training staff against the floor. Launched herself at the practice dummy, tearing it apart with her claws. But her movements were automatic, her mind clearly wandering. What troubles you? Asked when the session ended. Did not answer immediately. She stared at her claws, still dripping with the stuffing from the destroyed dummy. Master, what is knitting? He blinked. In 40 years of training warriors, no one had ever asked him that question. What? Knitting, the human does it. She makes things with strings. I want to know what it is. It is nothing, said firmly. A waste of time. You are a warrior, not a craftsman. But was already walking away, heading toward the observation deck with determined steps. Watched her go. He should stop her. He should report this to the Grand Warlord. The heir was being corrupted by the human's strange ways. But he did not move. Instead, he stood there, remembering something he had not thought about in many years. When he was young, before he became a warrior, his mother had taught him to carve wood. He had made a small bird once, working for days with a tiny knife until the shape emerged from the block. His father had burned it when he found out, saying it was a distraction from important things. Had never carved anything again. He shook off the memory and returned to his duties. But for the rest of the day, he could not stop thinking about that wooden bird. On the observation deck, sat by the window with her knitting needles clicking softly. She was making a scarf, something warm and practical, though she doubted she would ever need it on this cold ship where temperature was always the same. She heard small footsteps approaching and smiled without looking up. "Hello." The young heir stood a few feet away, her scales lying flat, which had learned meant she was calm, or at least not actively aggressive. "What are you doing?" asked. "Knitting. I'm making a scarf." "What is a scarf?" Held up the half-finished project. "It's a long piece of fabric you wrap around your neck to keep warm. Humans use them when it's cold outside." Moved closer, examining the yarn with curious eyes. "You are making it with your hands." "With these," showed her the knitting needles. "It's not hard once you learn how. My grandmother taught me when I was about your age." "Grandmother," tested the word. "This is your mother's mother." "Yes, she lived with us until she died when I was 15. She taught me lots of things. Cooking, knitting, how to fold paper into shapes," smiled at the memory. "She always said that making things with your hands was good for your soul." Soul, another unfamiliar word. The part of you that is not your body, the part that thinks and feels and dreams. Considered this, do not dream. "Everyone dreams," said. "Maybe you just don't remember yours." There was a long silence. Stared at the knitting needles, at the soft yarn, at the thing being created from nothing. "Can you teach me?" she finally asked. Her voice was quiet, almost embarrassed. Patted the seat beside her. "Sit down, I'll show you." The first hour was frustrating. Claws kept getting tangled in the yarn. Her natural instinct was to grip tight and pull hard, which only made knots. She growled in frustration several times, her scales bristling. "This is impossible," she snarled. "It's not impossible, you just haven't learned yet. Here, watch my hands again." Demonstrated the basic stitch slowly, over and over. Watched with intense focus, her golden eyes tracking every movement. "The trick is to be gentle," said. "Let the yarn move through your fingers, don't force it. Do not do gentle. Maybe you could try, just for this." Tried, she failed, she tried again. After 3 hours, she had produced a small square of fabric. It was lumpy and uneven, full of holes and mistakes. One corner was twice the size of the others. By any normal standard, it was terrible. Stared at it like it was the most precious thing in the universe. "I made this," she whispered. "With my claws, I made something." "You sure did." "It is ugly." "It's your first try. My first try was worse." Looked up at her. "Really? Really want to see?" Reached into her bag and pulled out a small, misshapen blob of yarn. "This was my first project. I was trying to make a hat. It looks more like a sad potato." Made a sound that had never heard before. It started in her chest and bubbled up through her throat, emerging as a sharp, barking noise that repeated several times. It took a moment to realize what was happening. Was laughing. Across the observation deck, 2 guards who had been pretending not to watch suddenly drew their weapons. They had never heard a laugh before. They thought the air was choking or having some kind of attack. Waved them away. "She's fine, she's just laughing, it's a good thing." The guards looked at each other in confusion, but holstered their weapons. They would have much to report later. Laughter faded, but her eyes were still bright. "It does look like a sad potato. What is a potato?" "A vegetable, they grow in the ground. I'll show you a picture later." They sat together in comfortable silence for a while, working on her scarf while started a second knitting square. This one was slightly less terrible than the first. said eventually, "Why do you not fear me?" It was the same question she had asked that first night, but it felt different now. Less like a challenge and more like genuine curiosity. "Do you want me to fear you?" asked. Was quiet for a long moment. "My father says fear is power, that people obey because they are afraid." "That's one way to get people to obey," agreed. "It works for a while, but people who obey out of fear will betray you the moment they think they can get away with it." "Then how do humans make people obey?" "Thought about this. We try to make them want to obey. We try to give them reasons to follow us besides fear, respect, love, shared goals. It doesn't always work. Humans fight each other all the time, but when it does work, it creates something stronger than any army." Looked down at her knitting, her small claws working the yarn with increasing skill. "My tutors say humans are weak, that you only survive because you breed quickly and spread fast, like insects." "Maybe we are weak," said. "We break easily. We die from things that wouldn't even scratch us, but I think there are different kinds of strength." "What do you mean?" Held up her scarf. "This yarn is weak. I could snap it with 2 fingers, but when you knit it together it becomes something stronger, strong enough to keep someone warm on a cold night. Humans are like that. We are weak alone, but together we can do amazing things." Considered this for a long time. "I want to keep learning," she finally said. "Will you teach me more?" "Same time tomorrow." The future warlord of the empire nodded, clutching her ugly, wonderful first creation to her chest. "Same time tomorrow." When returned to her quarters that night, her caretaker was waiting. The old female had served the royal family for decades. She had raised himself when he was a child. She saw the small knitted square in his claws. She saw the way the Heir's scales were lying flat and smooth. She saw the strange light in those golden eyes. "What has happened to you?" asked. Held up her creation. "I made this. Do you want to touch it? It is soft." Touched the lumpy fabric with one trembling claw. "It is soft," she agreed. And for the first time in her very long life, she wondered if perhaps everything she believed about the universe was wrong. 3 months had passed since arrived on the dread sovereign, and the changes in were impossible to ignore. She still trained with deadly skill. Her combat scores had not decreased. If anything, her instructors reported that she fought with more purpose now, more focus. Before, she had attacked with blind instinct. Now she thought about her movements. She chose when to strike and when to wait. But outside of training, she was different. She spent hours with the human every day. They knitted together on the observation deck, creating small objects that served no military purpose. They walked through the ship's botanical chambers, were taught to identify plants that were beautiful instead of deadly. They sat in the archives, reading about human history, not to find weaknesses to exploit, but because was genuinely curious. And she laughed now. That strange, barking sound that had once terrified the guards had become almost normal. Crew members still looked up when they heard it, but they no longer reached for their weapons. The whispers spread through the ship like fire. Some said the human was a spy, using strange psychological techniques to weaken the Heir. Others said the Heir was studying the human, learning to mimic emotions she did not truly feel. A few, speaking only in the darkest corners where they were sure no one could hear, wondered if perhaps the Heir was simply happy. That last possibility was the most disturbing of all. Grand Warlord called a meeting of his advisors. They gathered in his private chambers, the most trusted members of his inner circle, warriors and strategists who had helped him conquer an empire. Spoke first. She was his chief strategist, a female with brilliant red scales and a mind sharper than any blade. "The Heir grows soft, my lord. The human's influence corrupts her. This must end before permanent damage is done." "Define soft," said. "She makes things with yarn. She asks questions about feelings. She laughs." Spoke the last word like it was a disease. "These are not the qualities of a warlord." raised one weathered claw. He was the oldest of the advisors, ancient by standards, his scales faded to pale gray. He had served father and grandfather before him. "If I may," he said slowly, "I have been observing the heir's combat training. Her scores have improved, not declined." "Combat is not everything," snapped. "It is everything that matters," replied calmly. "But perhaps you are right. Perhaps we should look beyond combat." He turned to, "My lord, have you noticed how the crew responds to your daughter now?" Frowned. "What do you mean?" "Before the human came, they obeyed out of fear. They looked away when she passed. They trembled when she spoke." Paused. "Now they look at her. Some of them smile. They are no longer afraid of her." "That is exactly the problem," said. "Is it?" asked. "We have ruled through fear for 1,000 generations. Our empire is vast, but it is also unstable. Every planet we conquer rebels the moment our fleet departs. We spend more resources fighting uprisings than we gain from the conquest itself." Silence fell over the room. This was truth that no one liked to speak aloud. "The Human Federation is different," continued. "Their colonies do not rebel. Their allies join them willingly. We called them weak because they do not rule through fear, but perhaps we were wrong." "You suggest we become like humans?" His voice dripped with contempt. "I suggest we consider that there are different kinds of strength. Looked at, the heir is learning this. She is learning that she can be respected without being feared, that she can lead without terrorizing. Is this truly corruption?" Dismissed his advisors. He needed to think. That night he walked through his ship alone, something he had not done in many years. He watched his crew at their duties, saw how they moved aside when he approached, saw the fear in their eyes. They obeyed him because they were terrified. If he showed weakness for even a moment, they would tear him apart. That was the way. That had always been the way. But was it the only way? He found himself at the observation deck. Through the window, he could see and sitting together. Was showing the human something she had knitted, a small lumpy object that might have been an animal. Was clapping her hands, her face bright with genuine delight. Was smiling too, her teeth showing not in threat but in joy. Had never seen his daughter smile before. He entered the room, his massive form blocking the starlight from the windows. Both of them looked up, but neither showed fear. Scales did not bristle, did not tremble. "Daughter," he said, "show me what you have made." Hesitated, then held up her creation. It was a small figure, 4 legs and a round body and something that might have been a tail. She had been working on it for weeks. "It is a cat," she said. "They are animals from Earth. Showed me pictures. They are soft and they make sounds when they are happy." Took the small object in his massive claws. The yarn was soft against his scales, softer than anything he had touched in years. The work was clumsy, imperfect, clearly made by someone still learning. But it was made, created from nothing, brought into existence by his daughter's own hands. He thought of his empire built on blood and fear. He thought of the endless rebellions, the constant need for more soldiers, more ships, more weapons. He thought of the Federation, those soft humans who had spread across the stars without ever conquering a single world. Their colonies loved them. His subjects only feared him. "It is good," he said finally, handing the cat back to. She stared at him with wide eyes. He had never praised her before. Parents did not praise their children. It would make them weak. "Father, continue your lessons with the human," he said. "Learn what she has to teach you." He paused, struggling with words he had never spoken. "You will be Warlord after me. Perhaps you can find a different way to lead." He left before either of them could respond. Back in his chambers, stood at his window, watching his conquered world spin in the darkness. He thought about fear and respect, about conquest and alliance, about strength and softness. He had been Warlord for 50 years. He had never questioned the way things were done. But now, watching his daughter learn to create instead of destroy, he felt something crack inside him. something that had been frozen for so long he had forgotten it existed. He did not know what it was, but he thought maybe it was hope. The next morning, he issued a new order. The human was to be given full access to all parts of the ship. She was to be treated as an honored guest, not a political hostage. Any crew member who threatened or insulted her would answer to him personally. Came to his chambers, her red scales bright with anger. "My lord, this is madness. You are telling the crew that a human is our equal." "I am telling the crew that my daughter's teacher is to be respected," said. "That is not madness. That is wisdom. The other warlords will hear of this. They will think you have gone soft. Let them think what they want." Turn to face her. "I have been conquering worlds for 50 years. Our empire grows, but it never stops fighting. We win every battle, and yet we are always at war." He paused. "Perhaps it is time to try something different." Left without another word. Knew she would begin plotting against him. That was the way. Show weakness, and others would try to take your place. But as he watched his daughter knitting with the human on the observation deck, laughing at some joke he could not hear, he found that he did not care. Some things were worth the risk. The day of secession ceremony arrived with great celebration. It was a tradition as old as the empire itself. When an heir reached a certain age, they were formally recognized before the entire crew. From that day forward, they would be trained not just as warriors but as future leaders. The great hall of the Dread Sovereign was filled with every member of the crew who could be spared from their duties. Hundreds of stood in perfect lines, their scales polished, their eyes fixed on the throne where Grand Warlord sat in full ceremonial armor. Beside the throne stood. This had caused some argument among the advisors, but had insisted. The human had earned her place at his daughter's side. Walked down the center of the hall, her scales gleaming silver in the bright lights. She had grown in the past months, now almost 4 feet tall. Her horns were beginning to show, small bumps that would one day curve into the fearsome weapons of an adult. But it was her eyes that had changed the most. They were still gold, still fierce, but there was something else in them now, something that looked like understanding. The ceremony began with ancient words spoken in the old tongue, placed his claws on his daughter's head, and declared her his heir before the gods of war and conquest. The crew responded with roars of approval, stamping their feet against the metal floor until the whole ship seemed to shake. Then came the feast. Long tables had been set up throughout the hall, covered with food and drink. Warriors who had been standing at attention moments ago now relaxed into celebration, talking and laughing and eating. Stayed close to, watching the young heir navigate the social complexities of politics. Important warriors came to pay their respects. Rivals came to test her strength with carefully worded insults, handled them all with a grace that surprised everyone. She had learned much in these past months. Was reaching for a drink when she saw him. He was unlike any other, dressed in the plain uniform of a lower crew member, but his eyes were wrong. They were not watching the celebration. They were watching with a focus that made stomach turn cold. She had seen that look before, in the eyes of people who had nothing left to lose. Time seemed to slow down. The assassin moved, pulling a plasma blade from beneath his uniform. It glowed bright white, hot enough to cut through scales like paper. He was fast, faster than any normal crew member should be. Enhanced, probably, modified for this one purpose. He was 3 steps from. 2 steps. Did not think. She had no weapons. She had no training. She had nothing but her body and her certainty that she would not let this child be hurt. She threw herself between and the blade. The plasma burned through her shoulder and she screamed. The pain was unlike anything she had ever felt, white-hot and all-consuming. She could smell her own flesh burning. But she did not move. She wrapped her arms around and curled her body into a ball, making herself a shell around the small heir. If the assassin wanted to kill, he would have to go through her first. The assassin raised his blade for another strike. He never completed the motion. His roar filled the hall. It was not the sound of a child. It was the sound of every warlord in her bloodline, every generation of conquerors and killers, condensed into a single moment of pure fury. She exploded out of his protective embrace with a speed that should have been impossible for her size. Her claws, still small but sharp as razors, found the assassin's throat before anyone else could move. Blood sprayed across the polished floor. The assassin fell, dead before he hit the ground. For a moment there was absolute silence. Then chaos erupted. Guards rushed forward, surrounding the body. Medics ran to who had collapsed, her shoulders still smoking from the plasma burn. Through the pain, she saw standing over the dead assassin, covered in blood, her small body shaking not with fear but with rage. "She protected me," said. Her voice was barely a whisper, but somehow everyone heard it. "She is human, she is soft, she protected me." Was there suddenly, his massive form kneeling beside as the medics worked on her wound. His eyes, usually so cold, were bright with something she had never seen before. "Take her to the medical bay," he ordered. "She receives the best care we have, the very best." Was lifted onto a stretcher. The pain was fading now, replaced by a floating numbness that was probably not a good sign. But as they carried her away, she saw following, her small claws clutching at the edge of the stretcher like she was afraid would disappear. "You protected me," said again. "You could have died." "Worth it," managed to whisper. "You're worth it, little teeth." Made a sound that was half laugh, half sob. Blood dripped from her claws onto his arm, mixing with the human's blood already pooling there. In culture, mixed blood was a sacred thing. It meant bonds stronger than family, ties that could never be broken. Did not know this, but did. 3 days later, woke in the medical bay. Was there, checking her bandages with those surprisingly gentle claws. "You will live," he said. "The damage was severe but not permanent. You will have a scar." "I have lots of scars," said. Her voice was rough. "From kids throwing things at me, this one is just bigger." Made a sound that might have been a laugh. "You are very strange, human." "You said that before." "It remains true." A small figure appeared in the doorway, crept into the room, moving slower than usual, like she was afraid of what she might find. "Hey, little teeth," managed a weak smile. "I'm okay, come here." Crossed the room and climbed onto the edge of the bed. She was clutching something in her claws, a small knitted object. "I made this while you were sleeping," she said. "It is supposed to be a flower. Flowers make humans feel better," you said. The knitted flower was lumpy and uneven, purple yarn twisted into something that vaguely resembled petals. It was beautiful. "I love it," said. "I will never bite you again," said solemnly. "I promised myself never again." "You can if you want," reached out with her uninjured arm and touched his cheek. "I don't mind, little teeth, remember." Made that half laugh, half sob sound again and pressed her face against his hand. They stayed like that until Grand Warlord entered the room. He stood in the doorway, watching his daughter hold the human's hand like it was the most natural thing in the world. "Human," he said finally, "you saved my daughter's life." "She saved herself," said. "I just gave her a few extra seconds." "You threw yourself in front of a plasma blade. You have no scales, no armor. You knew you would be hurt." "I knew I wouldn't let anyone hurt her." Was silent for a long moment. When he spoke again, his voice was formal, carrying the weight of ancient tradition. "By the laws of our people, you have earned the right of blood. You protected the air with your body. Your blood mixed with hers on the field of battle." He paused. "From this day forward, you are imperial ant, blood of our blood, claw of our claw. Any threat against you will be answered as a threat against the air herself." Blinked. "I don't know what that means." "It means you are family," said, her eyes bright with joy. "It means you can never leave." O looked at the small alien holding her hand, at the massive warlord standing in the doorway, at this ship of monsters who had somehow become something like home. That's okay. I didn't want to leave anyway. Nodded once and left without another word, but could have sworn she saw something like a smile on his fearsome face. Months later, when reports reached the other warlords about the human who had changed the dread sovereign, they did not know what to make of it. The heir who laughed, the grand warlord who spoke of alliances instead of conquests, the crew who no longer cowered in fear but worked together with something that looked almost like trust. Some said it was weakness, and they would soon collapse. They were wrong. The dread sovereign became the most efficient ship in the fleet. Crew members who were not afraid performed better. Officers who were respected instead of feared made better decisions. The heir who had learned to create as well as destroy became a leader that warriors actually wanted to follow. And at the center of it all was a small human woman who had faced the galaxy's greatest predators and seen only children who needed patience, understanding, and someone to teach them how to knit. Humanity's greatest weapon was never their technology or their numbers. It was their stubborn refusal to see monsters where there were only people waiting to be understood. In her quarters on the dread sovereign, surrounded by knitted creatures and wind chimes made of scales, sat with by the window. They were working on a blanket together, something big and warm and soft. "What color should the border be?" asked. Considered the question seriously. "Blue, like your Earth oceans. I want to see them someday." "You will. Someday I'll take you there." "Promise." "Promise." Outside the window, stars drifted past. Somewhere among them was Earth, a small blue planet full of soft, strange humans who had somehow found their way across the universe. And somewhere among them was a future where fear was not the only answer. Leaned against uninjured side, her scales warm and smooth. "I am glad you came here," she said quietly. "I am glad I bit you." Laughed and kissed the top of her head, right between those growing horns. "Me too, little teeth, me too."